Welcome back to my series of Spider-Man reviews. I'm Jack Infinity 203, and this is the second episode in our Spider-Man review, and we are talking about Spider-Man 2. As I like to call it, this is the best Spider-Man movie we've had to date. It's amazing. It's phenomenal. It is absolutely perfect, in my opinion. It takes what worked from the previous movie, and it just upped all of that, and it's absolutely terrific from start to finish. I am so excited to talk to you guys about this movie today. Spider-Man 2 is about Peter Parker as he continues being Spider-Man, protecting those he loves and the people of New York City. However, he begins to lose his powers under mysterious circumstances, and he starts to question whether he wants to continue being Spider-Man or whether he wants to live a normal life as Peter Parker. While that happens, a scientist known as Otto Octavius loses his wife in a failed experiment, and he becomes the villainous Doc Ock, vowing revenge on Spider-Man, same as Harry Osborn, who wants revenge on Spider-Man for the death of his father, Norman. The acting here is phenomenal. Tobey Maguire continues to do a great job portraying Peter Parker and Spider-Man. This time around, because he's now playing half and half this time, he is doing a great job mastering both roles, whether it's as Peter Parker, the teen who's trying to live his life and trying to be there for his friends and family, or Spider-Man, who wants to continue to protect New York City from those who wants to do harm and to help people the best he can. It's great to see this now that this story has him losing his powers, and Tobey Maguire does a great job selling to us that his character is losing his powers and he just wants to be normal. But then he starts to question that being Spider-Man is what the city needs. Kirsten Dunst is great as MJ this time around, just like in the first movie. And James Franco also does a terrific job portraying Harry Osborn. And this time we see him a little more angrier this time than in the first movie, because he's still angry with how Spider-Man killed his father and he wants revenge, and especially the situation with Otto Octavius. It really has him in quite the tough spot. And I really liked how that plays off of Otto, Peter Parker, and the other characters throughout the movie. J.K. Simmons does another perfect job as J. Jonah Jameson in the second movie, as we see him do a lot of iconic moments like his laugh.
You serious?
His one-liners, and especially the scene where he believed that Spider-Man was a hero until he steals the suit back, and then he goes back to being his old self again. Alfred Molina is outstanding as Otto Octavius. He is one of the greatest comic book villains in the history of comic book movies. His character is such a complex character, as he's just a scientist who wants to take humanity into new heights with his experiment, but it ended up backfiring poorly to the fact that it ended up changing his mindset. He ended up becoming this person who wants to get revenge on Spider-Man because he blames him for what happened to his wife. Alfred Molina is perfect as Doc Ock, and I could not have imagined anybody else for the part of Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2. And I loved his character arc from the start of the movie all the way till the end, when in the end he gets to redeem himself by saving the city. Another thing Spider-Man 2 excels at is the visual effects. It improved over the VFX in the first movie, and the scenes like the web-swinging scenes, the action sequences are just gorgeous to watch. It holds up so well for a Spider-Man movie that came out in 2004, and it holds a candle to movies like The Amazing Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's great to watch. It's done so well, and the VFX artist done a marvelous job. The action sequences in this movie are spectacular. They look really, really good, and has some of the most iconic action sequences in the history of comic book movies, in the form of the train sequence. This is one of the best action sequences in the history of Spider-Man movies, comic book movies, and movies as a whole. The fight between Spider-Man and Doc Ock on the train is exhilarating. It's so well done. It's a blast to watch, and it's awesome seeing Spider-Man use a variety of his fighting with his webs or with his fist as he takes on Doc Ock on a train full of civilians. And it leaves you on the edge of your seat, and it's just all out amazing. And it's one of the best action sequences I've ever seen in a movie. This train sequence also gives me what is possibly one of my favorite Spider-Man moments of all time, if not the best one, right here. This sequence as Spider-Man is trying to use all of his power to save these people on a train that's about to fall, it is absolutely intense. It just seeing a man like Spider-Man, who's not invincible, using all of his power and all of his strength to save these people, even though he's unmasked, it's absolutely mesmerizing. One thing I thought the movie did a really good job at was depicting the Spider-Man No More storyline, which is very crucial to the movie. The early half of the movie does a good job at depicting what Peter's life is like when he's not Spider-Man. He's late to college, he's late to his classes, he's always missing out on events for his friends and family, he's not contacting them very often as he should, and he's working too hard and he's not getting the money he needs to stay financially secure. And it really shows you that being Spider-Man is a huge strain on his life, because while it's good that he's out there saving people, he's just not getting the life that he deserves and he's just not happy. You just see him kind of down on life whenever he's not Spider-Man. And when he actually gives up his suit and he gives up being Spider-Man after his powers start to mysteriously fade, it really makes it believable and emotional to see him be like, I'm done being Spider-Man and I'm going to be Peter. And it's so good. Also, the fact that you got to see for a good chunk of the movie what being in New York City without Spider-Man is like, and how Peter sees people getting beaten up in an alley and seeing a fire happen in a house, like a house fire, and that somebody didn't make it. And it really kind of shows Peter that it's like Spider-Man needs to return. New York needs Spider-Man. And without him, New York City is a much more darker place than it is. And it does a good job at showing you that Peter needs to be Spider-Man, and shows you that he's willing to sacrifice his happiness so that other people are happy. And it's a sad thing, but it's also done so brilliantly. Especially the scene where Aunt May tells him what being a hero is. And it's so emotional and it's so heartfelt. It's just such a brilliant scene of Aunt May telling Peter what being a hero is and what it would require. And it's such a sad scene to watch, and it always gets me to shed a tear. And so as the scene where Uncle Ben, as he gave up his powers, that Uncle Ben talks to him in his mind, and he's just like, this feels like he's disrespecting his legacy for not being Spider-Man, because Uncle Ben always wants Peter to be a good guy and to put others before himself. And that is what another scene that helps make Peter's transition to becoming Spider-Man once again being all the more satisfying. Spider-Man No More is a storyline that's done so well, where you see him learn what it requires and what it's like having to be both Spider-Man and being Peter Parker, and what the dangers of being two people is. The pacing is terrific. I don't know how I would compare this pacing to the pacing of the first movie, but I know it's just as good as the pacing of the first movie, or even better. It uses all of its scenes from the opening all the way to the end. And so as every scene is used perfectly, and it helps push the story forward. No, there's no scene in this movie that I think halts the movie or goes on too long. It doesn't drag. It goes on, it goes. And for a movie that's only 2 hours and 7 minutes, that's great for a movie like Spider-Man 2. And that's another thing that this movie used to its advantage and crafted a very well-paced story. I never mentioned this in my review of Spider-Man, but I think Rosemary Harris is easily the best Aunt May we've ever had in the history of Spider-Man movies. She's perfect casting. I love her dynamic with Peter, and I love her heartfelt moments with Peter, especially when she hands him money because of after what happened to Uncle Ben, especially the scene where she tells Peter what being a hero truly means, and especially the scene where Peter confessed to Aunt May that he was responsible for what happened to Uncle Ben. She's brilliant. She's the best casting for Aunt May, and it's just phenomenal. Doc Ock's resolution in this movie is perfect. It really shows you that Doc Ock is just a complex character who's not your average villain who just wants to destroy the city. No, he just wants to do what he wants for mankind. He just wants to push them forward in its evolution. And he ended up falling from grace, and he becomes Doc Ock, the villain. And I loved how you see him as he loses his wife. He also gives us an outstanding scene where he wakes up in the hospital and he just kills every single one of his tentacles, kill all the doctors involved. It's scary. It is like horror vibe. It felt like you're watching a horror movie, because Sam Raimi has directed horror movies in the form of Evil Dead. And it's such a scary scene. And it shows me that he is a perfect candidate for directing Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness coming out next year, which I'm really excited for, by the way, but that's another story. So, Doc Ock, and I loved how the movie ended his story, where Peter gave him a chance to redeem himself for what he did before, and he chooses to destroy the machine and save the city with the line of, "I will not die a monster." And then he dies as he drowns into the river, destroying the machine, knowing that he saved the city from destruction. So I will say, speaking about that, I am nervous about how he's going to be handled in Spider-Man No Way Home, just because of how it's the same version as in this movie. And I hope it's done well. I hope they keep it intact, because this is such a great arc and a great resolution to Doc Ock's story. And I'm afraid that they might undo it, and I really hope they do it well. I love Alfred Molina's Doc Ock, especially in this movie, but I hope that in No Way Home they keep his arc intact. What this movie also depicts the best is what being Spider-Man truly means. Being Spider-Man isn't simply putting on a Spider-Man suit and going out there with web shooters and all that. No. What it really means is that anybody is Spider-Man. Anybody can be a hero. With Spider-Man, he teaches you to always be the best version of yourself, no matter how bad the danger is, and to always go headfirst into doing the right thing. Because if you don't do the right things, there will always be consequences that follow. And this movie depicts it the best, especially with the Spider-Man No More arc, when he loses his powers, but then he learns to eventually pick up the mantle again and come back to save the city again. This movie does a brilliant job at depicting both the Spider-Man No More storyline, and so as detailing what it truly means to be Spider-Man. And that anybody can be Spider-Man, even if you don't wear the mask. But then it also comes up with these iconic words: with great power comes great responsibility. All in all, I think Spider-Man 2 is an absolutely amazing movie. It's a perfect comic book movie, and it is, without a doubt of my mind, the best Spider-Man movie we've had to date. I'm going to give Spider-Man 2 an A+, and it's an absolute must-see for everybody. Please definitely check out this movie if you haven't. Spider-Man 2 is an absolutely spectacular movie. It's a great Spider-Man movie, and it is truly one of the best comic book movies of all time, and even one of my favorite movies ever made. So, those are my thoughts on Spider-Man 2. What did you think about this movie? Let me know down below in the comments section. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this movie. Don't forget to give this movie a like, comment down below, and subscribe for more.